Good afternoon. So I warmly welcome you to the talk series organized by CES, Center for Environmental Sustainability. So before we move on to the talk today, I would like to tell you a little bit about CES. So CES is Center for Environmental Sustainability, formerly known as Center for Environmental Studies. So at CES, we conduct training programs, short courses, certificate courses, then we do consultancy, then we also engaged in research and environmental management. So very recently we came up with two programs, volunteer programs. One program is for the students, what we call the green terms or green internship program. And we also have a program for our staff, Green Ambassador program. So the reason for these two programs are to allow you or give you the opportunity to work with us to promote sustainability at University of Peradeniya. So today we are organizing this talk series, or we started the first talk series will be today. And so this talk series was organized to promote environmental awareness among our staff and students. And this particular talk we organized it to commemorate the World Migratory Birds. So on twice a year, May 13th and October 14th, we are commemorating migratory bird species. So this particular talk is on bird species of Sri Lanka, which include both migratory and native species. So today we gathered here to listen to the talk by Dr. Flamingo Dr. Flamingo graduated from University of Peradeniya with a BSc Special Degree in Zoology with a first class honors. In 2001, he joined the Department of Zoology as an academic staff member, and at present, he's working as a senior lecturer at the same department. For his master's and doctoral degrees, he carried out research in the field of ecology, especially avian biology, avian ecology. And his current research primarily focused on bird ecology and conservation. And he has published numerous research papers on the subject, and he teaches courses in avian and mammalian biology, wildlife management, and ecology, both at undergraduate and postgraduate level. So I warmly welcome Dr. Sundara, one of the best bird experts in Sri Lanka, to deliver his talk on, it's a mouthful, diversity and conservation of birds in the northern avifaunal zone of Sri Lanka, insight from a 5-year study.
Can you hear me? Can all of you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Right. So without this time is already 1:10, so I will just move on to the outline of my presentation today. So we will look at the birds of Sri Lanka very briefly, and then we will talk about the migration, what is migration, and so on. And then I will go over the water birds, and of course the northern avifaunal zone as we have defined that during our research. And then I'll talk about our 5-year-long study. And then I will also show you, if you are interested in going there and do some birding, then of course I will show you some of the major birding sites in the northern province, right? And then lastly, I hope to by my time I'll talk about the threats to the birds and their habitats, as well as the difficulties we faced during our 5-year study, as well as some community work that we did from our research. That is the outline. So moving on to the birds. So I have not said class AVs because now actually birds are included with the reptiles. So we can't say class AVs. So it is AVs as a group, right? So the world diversity is about 10,000 species, a little over 10,000 species we have. but in the Indian subcontinent, we have about 1,300 species, right? So this is, you can see this is a very diverse group of vertebrates. And if we talk about the birds of Sri Lanka, according to the latest information, latest official checklist, we have 510 recorded species. And out of that, 244 are breeding residents on this island, right? And then 179 are actually regular migrants, as well as we have 87 species of vagrants, and I will explain those terms. So the breeding residents, of course, they are the species that breed within the territory of the country. The migrants, they are the species present in the country for some time of the year, but then they don't breed within the country. None of the migrants breed in our country. And then vagrants are actually the species that are recorded from time to time. This year they may be present, but next year they are totally absent. So those are the vagrants, like this Hercules dove, for example, right? So all these pictures were actually taken by me in the relevant A4 region. I have given the location also for most of them, right? In other slides, you will see the locations also, right? So when you talk about migration, right? So migration is actually a regular, two-way, extensive movement of animals, right? But then people also talk about migrating to Australia, but they never come back. That is not migration, that is emigration, right? So in scientific terms, migration has to be a regular, that means they go back and forth, right? Every year they come back, they go and then they come back. So that is migration. And it has to be extensive movement. There are lots and lots of individuals of the same species moving, right? So like this diagram really shows that. So you can see this Hadronian goldfish. So this is the breeding area in North America, right? And then it goes all the way up to the southern tip of South America for wintering, right? And then it comes back every year. So back and forth. So that is mass movement of individuals back and forth. That is migration, right? So that is how we define migration. And then if you look at the migratory routes, right, there are 8 major flyways all over the world. So we get our migrants from this Central Asian flyway, this one, this illustrated here, right? And then when you look at the migration routes to Sri Lanka, we usually have 3 major routes: Western route, the Eastern, and the Andaman route. So those are the 3 routes by which we get most of our species, right? And then migration, when you talk about migration, it is kind of different from nomadic wanderings, right? So because nomadic wanderings, they usually happen when food is unpredictably sporadic, right? But in contrast, migration is actually in response to predictable increases in food. Because they can predict in that area there is more food. So then they will migrate to that area and come back. So that is the difference between nomadic movements or wanderings and then migration, right? So the World Migratory Bird Day 2023, actually the theme is it actually focuses on water, right? So the theme is water sustaining bird life. So that is the global, the international theme this year, right? So that is why we thought that we will talk about migratory water bird species, mostly not only migratory but resident and migratory species altogether. October 13th and 14th, May 13th and October 14th, because in the southern and the northern hemisphere, there are different migratory days, right? So that is why that is to reflect these 2 northern and the southern hemispheres. That is why we have 2 days to commemorate this migratory bird day. So when you talk about water birds, right? So they are actually now the term the water birds has actually generally it has been replaced by the traditional term which is waterfowl. So we don't call them waterfowl anymore. We use the term water birds, right? So water birds, according to the Ramsar Convention, they are actually the birds that are ecologically dependent on wetlands. So they are usually dependent on the presence of wetlands. So that is why they are called water birds. So you can see this Wankali sanctuaries. It is also in the northern Avifauna region, right? It's a Ramsar wetland in Sri Lanka. one of 5 Ramsar wetlands. So it's a heaven for migratory bird species. So the water birds are important indicators of the ecological conditions and the productivity of wetland ecosystems, right? And then they are also, key attributes of the biodiversity of many wetlands. So we can identify really good wetlands by the presence of the number of bird species, the water bird species in those wetlands. And then the number of water birds, using a given wetland is actually a good indicator of that site's biological importance. So that means they are used as biological indicators also, indicator organisms. Okay? So when you talk about Sri Lanka, we have recorded approximately 164 species of water birds, right? And then, they are more usually found in the coastal and the inland wetland areas. So that is the entire Sri Lanka, 164 species. Some of them are shown here, right? So the richest, there are actually 4 very rich waterbird areas, starting from Jaffna Peninsula, this area, and then Manna, and then Puttalam to Chilau, and then the southern coastal zone. So those are the 4 major waterbird areas in Sri Lanka, right? So they have very, very high densities of waterbirds in these areas, right? So, and then, this one, the northern avifaunal region, as we have defined it, comprises of the area, this north of Wilpattu National Park, and then here north of Nila Valley. So that entire area is we have actually considered as the northern avifaunal region. So we actually did our research in this covering all these areas. So that is what I'm going to talk about today, right? So the northern avifaunal region actually includes 2 of the richest waterbird regions, Manna area and the Jaffna area. Okay? So the objective of our, or the aim of our long-term study, 5-year study, was to evaluate the waterbird diversity and the distribution in the northern avifaunal region, with the intention of recording areas of high waterbird abundance and high priority conservation areas. So that was our main objective. You can see a group of open-bill. This flock actually counted more than 800 individuals on that day, right? So this was the research team that we had. So, all of these actually, they are my students, right? So I'm over here. But there are certain people that are not in the picture because they have been, involved in that. But then from time to time, because not all of us can go at once, like during one, research trip. But then, some people like Dilan is now a lecturer at the University of Ruhuna, right? Some may go now almost, she has finished a PhD in Australia in Melbourne. So they are now actually most of them are now Nuantica in the US, so they have gone abroad now. But this was the research team that we did study. The photograph was taken in Chundikulam National Park, right? So the methodology, little bit about methodology. I'm not trying to be too, I will not try to be, not too scientific, but general terms, right? So we consulted internationally acclaimed texts for our methodology. Word census techniques in its 2nd edition now. It's really good, textbook for the methodology, and also ecological census techniques. That's another one. And for during each visit, so you can see some of the other members here that was not in that picture. The team actually assessed the abundance of birds, at each site, and then the species present and their, distribution as well as their habits or habitats, right? So I was also present in each and every one of these trips, and my students were there. So, right? The equipment, we used very simple equipment for this study. For example, vision in, spotting scope, right? So this is a really good one to observe birds at a very long distance. And then we had to count very large flocks. We used a tally counter, right? And then in some areas, we also measured the water quality in some of the area. And then mostly we used, birding binocular. Those are the equipment that we used for this study. And then for species identification, also we have actually consulted the internationally acclaimed works like, Gulf of the World, Shorebirds, Seabirds, as well as very well recognized field guides to the birds of Sri Lanka. So those are the materials that we used for this study. And then this area shows our research site, starting from Vankali Sanctuary all the way up to Jaffna, and then all the way down from Tundikolam, Nandikalam, Naya, and up to Kogilai Lagoon on the east coast. This is on the west coast. So this is the entire area we covered during this 5-year study, right? So I will give you my results and then discuss that a little bit, right? So we recorded overall like 54 species of migrant birds and 47 resident species of water birds, not the other birds. Because we also recorded the other birds, but for this purpose, I have only taken out these water birds only. Right? So you can see there are more migrant species than the resident species in that area. So that is why I said it is a really good area for migrant species. And there were some special cases, and I will talk about them later on. Right? So before moving on to other aspects, I will briefly talk about the major groups of water birds, because otherwise this talk will not be complete without a knowledge of the water bird groups, right? So we have these Anseriformes. They are the typical waterfowl, right? As earlier called, the ducks, geese, and swans. So they have the waterproof plumage and also webbed or palmate feet. You can see between their toes, there's a webbing, right? So that is why they are called palmate or webbed feet. And of course, we have 18 species recorded, but only 3 species are resident here in Sri Lanka. And these are the 3 resident species. All the other species are migrants. Right? So they come during the migratory season. And then we have these rails and allies, the Gruiformes. So they have 13 species. So now probably this one is familiar to you. This is the Korwaka, the watercock or the water hen, right? And the Podicipediformes are the grebes. They are very little, small birds. They are foot propelled diving birds. The specialty here is that the feet are individually webbed, not like webbing between toes. They are individually webbed like this. So this one is actually, it is the smallest swimming bird in Sri Lanka. Everywhere in Sri Lanka, it is the smallest swimming bird. Okay. So I have given you the locations also. I will talk about these locations, right? And then flamingos, of course, this is the really talked about group because it is very popular among the tourists, especially the eco-tourists, right? So we have recorded 2 species of flamingo from Sri Lanka, but mostly this is the greater flamingo because this is a vagrant. Only a couple of times it has been recorded. So all of the other times, the greater flamingo is the one that we see in the northern province and everywhere else in Sri Lanka. So it is kind of an uncommon, species elsewhere, apart from the northern province, but it has been recorded in very high numbers in the Jaffna Peninsula, right? So, according to a study that we did over the 5 years, the total population size of that species came to about 6,000 individuals in the Jaffna Peninsula, right? So, I have quoted that study as well also, right? So this is a really very big flock that we came across back in 2017 in Tundikolam National Park. So we counted each and every individual in this flock. Numbered about a little over 3,000 individuals in this single flock. It was a really big flock in Tundikolam National Park. And there are 2 more really big flocks like this. This is Pandamanaga and this is LA. Again, these were numbering close to 1,000 individuals each, right? And this is a close-up of that greater flamingo. It's a very tall bird, about this tall, right? It's a really tall bird, pink, and it's a really beautiful bird also. Right? So during our study, even though it was a migrant, it is a migrant species, but we recorded flamingos year-round. That means even during the non-migratory period, it was there. The flamingos were there during these 5 years, right? So, and then high total numbers, they were observed outside the migratory season. So we actually suspected that somewhere they're going to breed or something, but then we couldn't find any nests or anything, right? But they were there the whole time. So if you look at the past records, there is past researchers like the British people, during the colonial time, they have also indicated that it has actually stayed on in Sri Lanka beyond the migratory period, right? So during those times, because there are breeding areas ran of Kutch in the India-Pakistan border. So in that area, the conditions were not good, so they actually kind of stayed. Probably that was the reason why we also found like 5 years they were staying in Sri Lanka, right, without going back. Right? But there is no definite indication of that species breeding in Sri Lanka up to date. So we don't know that if it is breeding, there is no positive evidence, right? So it is taken as a migratory species. So, and then our study also showed some of the local movements of this migratory species, because during the dry season, right, these flocks actually moved from the western parts of the Jaffna Peninsula, they moved towards the eastern, like Chundikulam and Nagarkovil area. So they were local movements within these 5 years. So these were actually discovered for the first time during our study, right? And then we also found that, the Jaffna Peninsula, the total area is only a little over 1,000 square kilometers, right? But then it holds a significant population of the greater Flamingo, right? But other areas in the northern province, like Mannar, right? So they have actually, we found very, very low numbers, like maybe 300, 400, like that. Not like in the Jaffna Peninsula. And then, according to our research, Chundikulam and Chundikulam National Park and Nagarkovil, the whole area they were actually identified as, important area for these uncommon migratory species, right? So that actually highlights their conservational value. So according to our 5-year study, these are the major flocking areas of the greater Flamingo in the Jaffna Peninsula, including Jaffna. This is Chundikulam, and these are the other areas. We found 18 sites that are frequented by these flamingos. Okay. Right, and then yes, the next order is Peradeniya. They are the typical waders. Now this one is actually yellow wattle lapwing. So if you go, right in your backyard in the botany department, there is the other species, the red wattle lapwing, right? But this one is found in the dry zone only, not in the wet zone, right? So this was actually from Pungudu. It's an island in Sri Lanka. So this is actually very well represented in Sri Lanka also, with over like 90 species, right? So it's a really well represented group. So the feet have a special structure, right? So they are called semi-palmate feet, because only halfway through they are, in some individuals, in some species, they are halfway through, the toes are webbed, right? Not fully webbed. Okay. Some of the examples of this order, right? These are all migrants, right? The Vimbrels, the curlews, the common sandpipers, red shanks, and all these, even these species, mostly they are migrants, but this one, of course, has a resident population also. I will talk about it later on, right? So Caspian tern is actually the biggest of all tern species in the world. It's really big, it's a huge species, right? And then, the Syconiiformes are the storks. But then previously in this order, people have placed ibises, spoonbill herons. They were also placed in this order, but now no longer, because we only include the storks, right? And that is according to the current classification, we only include these birds. Now we have 5 species, but only three are shown here. The other 2 are the adjutant stork and the black-necked stork. We have not recorded them from the northern province, except one adjutant at Kokila we have recorded. That is it. Soliformes are the frigate birds, the cormorants, the boobies, and so on. So they also have a special kind of feet, toe-palmate. That means in addition to these 3 toes, the 4th one, or the first toe is additionally webbed. So all 4 toes are webbed. So that is the special structure in these cormorants, right? And then we have these pelicaniformes, the ibises, the spoonbill. Now they are in their own order. So we have about 21 species here in this order, like spoonbills, spotted-billed pelicans, and so on, right? So actually, I have used the name suggested by Ian Henry, spotted-billed. Now it's called the spot-billed pelican, but I don't like that name, so I have used Henry's names, right? The old names, right? Right, and then these are some of the other examples: the glossy ibis, the little green heron, the black-headed ibis, right? And then finally, the last order that can be considered, some members are considered water birds. The Accipitriformes, the raptors, and the Coraciiformes, they are the kingfishers. So some members, like the white-bellied seagull, Brahmini kind, they are also considered water birds, even though they are in this Accipitriformes or the raptor. So that is the last order. Now, there are some special cases also, right? So, in these cases, the main population is resident, but there are minor migrant populations also. Each and every year, some are coming to here as migrants, like this Caspian tern, right? So now I have highlighted this Kentish plover because there was a recent issue with its classification, because now the local race researchers from the University of Colombo, right? So Department of Zoology there, they have actually identified this local race as a separate species, right? So that is this one. Race Seabovi, this is the one, this is actually from the works that I showed you earlier. So this whole place is about the Kentish plover race. Now this is our local race, right? So it is now regarded as a separate species. It's called the Hanuman plover, right? Dr. Sampath Seniratna from the University of Colombo, he has actually, this research team has identified it as a separate species. And they have cited our work also in their paper, right? So, but then now it's called a separate species. So that is Hanuman plover. So we have a new species for our list, starting from 20 last year, right? Right, and then the main population, there are some others that where the main population is migrant, but we have minor resident populations like these. All these have resident populations also, but the main population is migrant. And then there are certain species with mainly migrant populations with doubtful resident status, like the comb duck. Because earlier, long time back, it was a resident, but now it is actually mainly a migrant. And then there are also mainly resident species with doubtful migrant status, like the cattle eagle and the spotted-billed duck, which is shown here. Right? So it is actually a critically endangered breeding resident, this one, right? And then there are certain avian specialties in the northern equatorial region, right? That are actually specialties mean they are actually confined to the northern equatorial region. They are not found elsewhere in Sri Lanka. So they are, all of them are actually critically endangered breeding residents, like this, the Indian courser, spotted-billed duck, Saunders is there. Now I have highlighted this because according to the recent, very, very latest red list, so they have actually removed that from the resident list because we have actually, to date, some positive evidence of its breeding has, have not found in Sri Lanka, so they have actually removed it from the resident list. But I have retained it here because we have seen the juveniles anyway, right? So that means it may be breeding in the Adams Islands or somewhere hidden, right? So, and then if you take Sri Lanka, it is actually an end point in this Central Asian fiber. It's an end point. So you can see beyond Sri Lanka, there is no major, no major landmass. So that is why we get very, very high density of waterbirds, especially in these two areas, Jaffna and Manna, right? Because all the way from here, they end up their journey here in Jaffna and Manna. So that is why these are very sensitive areas for waterbirds, right? In the Central Asian region. So our study actually highlights some important sites for conservation of rare or very rare species, right? Some are actually confined to the northern equatorial region. And then they also prefer sites less altered by human beings. So they need, unaltered habitats, right? And then there are coastal systems. They are preferred by waterbirds, including lagoons, marshes, and so on, estuaries. And in these areas, you will see members of the family Anatidae, the Caradriidae, they are the waders, Scolopacidae, the sandpipers, and so on. Right? Laridae, the gulls and terns, right? And then there are locally numerous species. Ardeidae are the storks, Ciconia, herons, storks, and so on. Ibises, right? So, but then wherever if you see, when you see, waterbirds in large numbers, they are actually most of the time they are migrants. They are not residents. They are mostly migrant species. And then the inland systems, which of course we have not looked very much into because they are freshwater bodies, but there are not, many species are not found there, but there are like paddy fields, marshes, reservoirs. So they are frequented by these, Ardeidae, they are the herons, like this one, right? Very green heron or the created heron, right? So those species are there. And of course, some species like the spotted-billed duck, right? Now it has actually, it used to be a very, very rare migrant about maybe 2 or 3 decades back. When we were undergraduates, it was a migrant, right? When we were undergraduates, it was a migrant, but then gradually has established breeding populations within the region, that means the northern equatorial region, the spotted-billed duck, right? Now it is actually a breeding resident, critically endangered breeding resident. So there are certain species that breed in Sri Lanka only within our study area, like these bridal tern, sooty tern, lesser noddy, right? And also Indian poser, the crab plover, again, I have highlighted that because of that, doubtful status. Spotted bill duck, they breed only within that northern equatorial region. So it is a special area for these water birds. Right? And there were actually two, species that became extinct about 100 years ago in Sri Lanka as breeding residents, but now they are reappearing as migrants. So they are the glossy ibis and the home duck. Okay? And their highest numbers actually recorded in Jaffna and Manna today. So they, during the colonial times, during the Suddas time, they were actually breeding residents, but then these Suddas, they hunted them down, right? None were left, but now the Suddas are gone, so they are making a comeback now, right? So that is what I think, what is taking place here. Home duck, of course, above the bill, you can see a little comb-like structure. That is why it's called the home duck, right? A little comb-like structure above the bill, right? And then we did another very significant finding because the common food, earlier it was recorded as a really, really rare breeding resident in Sri Lanka. If you look at, go over Henry's book, right? It is recorded as a very rare breeding resident, but now, of course, we have recorded it in very, very large numbers, up to 1,000 in some areas, like the giant tank in Manna, right? So this part of that flock. So it's another significant finding. And of course, two migrant species. These two were also, the pigeon and the black-tailed godwit, they were also recorded very, very rare, about maybe 4 decades ago. They were listed as very rare migrants, but now, of course, we have actually seen thousands of these in Jaffna, right? So they are now, appearing in their houses, mostly in Jaffna and Manna area. So that's why I said that area, the entire northern region, is a really sensitive area for migrant species, right? And then I will also go over the major birding sites that, as we have found them, we have recorded several major sites. Now, we have divided them into 6 major areas in Jaffna Peninsula. Okay? The island area includes these areas, Peradeniya and associated areas, and then Sarasale and associated areas, and Valle and Thandamannar areas, Nagarkovil and associated areas, and Tundipulam National Park. So those are the 6 major areas that are important for water birds. So someday if you are planning to go there as a tourist, you can probably make a note of these areas and then visit specifically these areas. I will go over each and every one of them very, very briefly. So Mandaitu Island is an island here. The red dot shows that. So it has a really beautiful landscape with the salt marshes, right? So Great Picnic, I have highlighted this one. This is a really good place to watch that species, okay? And then this is Mandaitu, and then Alaipidi and Mantumba. Next to Mandaitu is Alaipidi and Mantumba in that area, right? So there are both these areas are actually really good locations in Jaffna to observe the critically endangered spotted bill duck. So if you are after that species, then for these 2 areas are really good places. And of course, again, with those 2 areas, Arali area is also a really good area to watch that critically endangered breeding resident. So we have recorded even chicks. So you can see in the distance, our research vehicle in the distance, right? So that is our research vehicle, right? All these 5 years, we have used that very old land, right? So that's our research vehicle. And then Saravana area is also an important area in this area, right? So because in 2018, we have recorded the largest flock of the spotted bill duck ever recorded, numbering 181 individuals in this area. So that is the largest on record of that critically endangered breeding resident. So that is why we kind of suspected that such a large number suddenly can't appear. So it might be a migrant population in addition to the breeding population. So that is why it has this doubtful migrant status, right, from nearby India. And then we have this Delft Island Wildlife Conservation Area. This is the Delft Island, so you have to take a boat, about 1 hour boat ride from the mainland to reach there. So that area has actually, it's now a national park, right? Delft Island National Park. So it is a really good area for the critically endangered breeding resident, the Indian poser, right? So we have actually searched everywhere from Mannar up to Jaffna, but we didn't find any of these posers except in Delft, right? So that is the only area where we found this species. So it's a really critically endangered breeding resident confined to that area, right? So these are the Delft ponies. We are very famous for the ponies. That's an introduced species. And then Kerativ, again, is a really good area for birds, including these migrants in the Middle Gulf. Because at the beginning of 2018, we recorded a large flock of that rare migrant, right, from that area. Anankilapu and Malurenpulo, those are also the two good areas for especially for the gulls and the terns, right, the water birds. These two areas. And then Puttur, that is also this area, right? So there are mangroves, right? So they are really good areas. So we have actually met with considerable flocks of the glossy ibis in this, this area and the next area, which is Savasala. That area is also a really good area with lush mangroves. So it's a really good mangrove area. Purple lackeys, which is frequently seen in that area, right? So there are so many other notable species. And then the next area is actually the Andhanapida, that area is also really good for to observe water birds in Jaffna. Right? They are, and then we have the Kapudu, the next area, right? Next one, this one, right? Kapudu. So that's also a really good area. You can see in this picture the flock of greater flamingos that we have, recorded from that area. And Karaveddi South and Mulli area, again, good for birds like, the migrant ducks, right? So you can see a lot of, large flocks of these migrant species there. And Velle, that's another important area. Kentish plover, the local race I talked about, this is actually now the Hanuman plover. So it is now breeding in this area, right? So that's an important area for the newly described species of bird, which is this area, right? And next to that is Tondamanar, this area, right? So that's also a really good area for water birds. And then Nagarkovil, a very, very large area of mangroves. This is a very large extent of mangroves in the northern province. So you can see so many water birds, including flamingos and so on, right? So this area here, right? It's a very large, very long extent of mangroves, right? And Mamune, next to Nagarkovil is Mamune, this area. So again, there are large flocks of flamingos, sometimes numbering over 2,000 individuals we have recorded. And there are so many other species as well. Chundikulam National Park is the last major area where it is actually very famous for its population of greater flamingo. Actually, it was established as a sanctuary back in 1938, just because it has this large population of flamingos. Right? During the colonial times, it was established as a sanctuary, but in 2015, it was upgraded as a national park. Right? So now it's a national park. And then, those are the major areas. And let's very briefly talk about the threats to water birds and the habitat that we have observed. Right? So, in terms of threats, we saw that in some areas there is unplanned road and hotel construction. You can see that this road cutting in the middle, like this mangrove has been cut into two fragments because of this road, right? So at the start of our research, that road was not there. So we had to walk through the mangrove, but then towards the middle of our research, suddenly it appeared, right? So maybe the Jaffna Provincial Council decided to erect this road for us, our research. That maybe, I don't know, right? So, and then, we also observed some high mortality of some of the water birds, especially under a high voltage power line in Sarsale back in 2015, but thereafter we didn't observe that. So you can see there are night herons, the eaglets, the grey herons, the ibises. There were lots and lots of them under this power line, high tension line. So you can see some of these large, these Villa and there is monitor. So there are 2 dead birds, right? But we didn't kill them; they were dead. Right? They were already dead. But we didn't publish this information because somebody might misinterpret our data, but we found them dead, right? So into the 2050, right? And then there is all over Jaffna, right? Especially in these mangroves, there is this unplanned disposal of garbage. There are so many plastic bags, and they are actually destroying these sensitive habitats. So that is very unfortunate, right? And of course, the difficulties we faced during our study, we will go over them very briefly, right? Now, of course, during some period, like especially during the rainy season, some of the access roads were flooded. Now here you can see assailant trying to cross this, trying to wade through this road, because in the dry season we actually drove up to here, right? So now it is underwater, right? Same thing here in the Nagarkovil major reserve. during the dry season, we could drive up to that point, the other end, but during the rainy season, it gets totally flooded, so we can't access. So the access problems are there, because we did this research every month for 5 years, each and every month, 2 days for 5 years. So it's like maybe 12 months into 5, right? So every year we recorded the weather pattern and everything. So some of these areas are flooded, right? Same thing here, in Saraswati, right? So you can see in the dry season, we could walk into this mangrove, but in the same area, right? Same area in the wet season, so nobody can walk because it's completely flooded in the wet season, right? And similarly, of course, yeah, valley also the same thing happens. So during the dry season, we could even drive in the middle of the lagoon, right? This is our research vehicle, and this is our driver, and two other research assistants, and myself, right? Standing in the middle of the lagoon, right? But in the wet season, it gets completely flooded, so no access, right? So those are some of the difficulties, and there is some more. Yeah, so in Nagarkoil, especially, there are landmines. Still, there are landmines laid down by these terrorists, right? So we don't know where they are. Even though there are lush mangrove here, nobody can walk inside because of these. Even the army doesn't know where they are. So that was another problem in that area, Nagarkoil, right? And then apart from that, we had to face extreme temperatures also. We have recorded these 44 degrees right here, and then 40 degrees, and then 42 degrees. So the team had to work under extreme, hostile environments for most of the time, especially during the dry season. So that is one of the highest, difficulties that we faced, right? Everybody was sweating, but then we worked somehow, right? For the sake of birds, right? So we worked. And then we also did some community work. Like we prepared some posters giving information on the most common species of birds in the northern province. And then we distributed all of them, in all 3 languages, distributed them in the schools, public schools in all 5 districts of the northern province. And we also had some seminars for the, awareness seminars for these younger people, right? So they actually now are kind of aware, right? And apart from that, we also erected some permanent signposts. Now, this one is, if you go there today, you will see that this is from Sarasale, right? So this actually these are our photos. Now we have prepared that, and it is now with the help of the wildlife department, we have erected those in this area. You can see the same photo. This photo is there, the same photo, right? And even in Mandai, these are some of the examples. We have erected a permanent signpost. Right? So this is part of the community work that we did during our 5-year study. Right? So I think that with that we have actually come to the last section of our work, which is the conclusions and the recommendations, right? Very, very briefly. So we know that this area has a number of important sites for water bird conservation. Very, very important, right? And many of these habitats support a very, very high species diversity as well as abundance of water birds. Right? And then, therefore, we recommend that many of these important sites have to be declared as protected areas. Actually, have some of them have already been declared, like Nagarkoil Nature Reserve. During our study, we actually sent our research papers to the wildlife department, and they had actually ended up declaring the Nagarkoil area as a nature reserve. So at least one area we got, and then the Sarasale area is actually now proposed as a sanctuary. So let's hope that only other areas, important areas, will be declared in the future, right? So yeah, and then last one is the literature I have cited. That's of course just to go through that, and then yes, acknowledgements. So the whole research was fully funded by the University of Peradeniya. I received 2 research grants. These are the numbers. So I have to acknowledge the University of Peradeniya for the funding. Then yeah, that is my acknowledgement, and then yeah, thank you. So that is all. Question time. Yes. The ways. Well, of course, yeah, I actually do a complete lecture on that during my avian biology lecture. So there are several ways. Some of them, of course, they make note of the landscape, the features of the landscape, right? So they follow the, like rivers and, those major landscapes. And then some of them are actually sensitive to the Earth's magnetic field because they have magnetite in their bodies. And then some others follow the celestial bodies like the stars in the night, right? And then the suns, the positions, right? So they have researchers that have found that is the way that they are actually finding these aliens. Yes. Any other question? Well, actually, I prepared this lecture for 1 hour, but then our coordinator asked me to stop it by maybe like 45 minutes, so that I had to run through some of the slides. That's why. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you think that so you have migratory birds? Why do you think they decide to breed somewhere and then they become breeding residents?
Yes.
What factors would influence something like that?
Well, yeah, that's a really good question. So we are actually hoping that all these migrant species someday start to breed here, but that's not happening, right? So the main reason may be because if they find similar conditions here, environmental conditions, they might think of starting, for that, of course, they need very large undisturbed areas first, right? So if we can provide those areas, they might start breeding, but then it has actually happened with the spotted-billed duck, right? Because earlier it was a migrant only, but during the recent decades, it has decided to breed here. So now it has a breeding population, right? So, but that has never happened with the flamingo because it needs a very large undisturbed area for breeding, which is found only in this India-Pakistan border, but we don't have such areas here except inside maybe Chundikolam National Park. Let's hope in the future maybe they will start breeding also, right? Yeah. Anything else? Yes, Vajivan, my friend. No questions. He's a chemistry guy also. Yes, doctor.
Just one question.
Yes,
I know in the south you've got problems with freshwater diversion, especially in areas like Gunda. Have you noted anything like that happening up north?
No, actually, that's also a really good question because in north, right, there is this Tondamanara barrage where they hope to desalinate that entire area, right? So they have made that barrage. Now already the Tondamanara barrage is already there. So they hope to, it's called the Jaffna River Project, right? So they hope to make the entire Jaffna area like a freshwater area. So if that happens some way, I mean, someday in the future, I don't think it will happen because there is always this water coming from other areas, right? So if that happens, then of course the flamingos will be gone forever. Not only flamingos, but then other water birds which have to have these, alkaline and these salt water areas, they will be gone forever. If that happens, because all the mangroves will be gone, and then there goes all our, shrimp farming producing areas also, right? So that is also a threat to fishery industry also. So that those things have to be actually done in consultation with the ecologists. That is what they are not doing. So, yeah, yes. Anything else? The students are usually silent. I can look at you because there's this big light facing my head. That's why blinding my eyes. That's why. Time's up. Yeah. Okay.
I think in your presentation, you mentioned that either one or two species, I can't remember whether it's one or two, which you didn't observe like 4 decades ago, maybe in small numbers, but now they are showing up in large numbers. So what's the reason you think for that?
Well, that's the vision and the black-tailed godwit. And so maybe during those times, if you look at this Henry's book, it is they both of them are now those times Henry has seen only a few individuals, but I think now with maybe the climate change, some of these areas are now probably becoming favorable for certain species. That might be the reason. That is why probably they are appearing in large numbers in these areas these days. But then on the other hand, some species are now disappearing. So because some conditions might make things favorable for some species, but not for all. So that might be the reason.
Diverting from somewhere else, so land is not suitable in that particular area, they used to.
Yes, maybe from nearby India, right? So they are maybe having difficulties landing there and spending time there, and then maybe they're ending up with their journey here in the northern area. That might be the reason, because the northern area, the other reason is actually because of this ongoing war for 30 years, that area was totally inaccessible for people. That is why there is still the very large areas of undisturbed habitat there. That is why probably we get large concentrations and high densities of waterbirds in that area still. That may be one of the reasons. Right? Because sometimes during the war was going on heavily, there were some painted storks spending time like in Min area, Tank and everywhere. Now, of course, if you go there, Min area today, they are all gone to northern areas. They are spending time there now. That might be another reason.
What are the sampling techniques used to note down the bird species?
We used a point count technique. Yes. Point count is the accepted protocol usually for water birds as well as other classifying birds. So where you stand on one point and then count all the birds you see round, right? And then you go to another point, maybe like 500 meters away, and then count the birds there. Right? So that is the standard protocol for observing water birds. Especially the Veterans International has proposed that methodology. Yeah. I have actually mentioned that in my presentation also. Yes.
So you mentioned about extreme conservation mostly. So when it comes to extreme conservation, what I'm talking about is zoos. And this example is I can give related to my question is the Hantana Peradeniya Park. So if we are concerned about the conditions provided for birds as not favorable, what are the steps that we can take to analyze the situation and get a proper conclusion whether it is actually favorable or not? And how can we proceed?
That's a really good question, because we are involved with the migratory species, right? So the migratory species, of course, ex situ conservation is not a very good option, because during the migratory season, they get through this special type of physiological change, which is known as the migratory restlessness. So they want to fly. So you can't keep them in a cage during that time. They will die. So for migratory species, the better, probably the only option would be in situ conservation. So that is why we are actually trying to, recommend conserving all these areas. Right, so that may be the only option for the migratory species. But for the resident species, of course, they don't go through this migratory restlessness or anything. So probably you can keep them in a cage and give them food. That's it. But for the migratory species, that might not be a very good option. Yeah. We have to conserve their habitats, because they depend on two habitats. One in Sri Lanka and one maybe in northern Siberia. Right? So both these, if one of these are altered, then they are in trouble. So that is why, and probably the reason. That's a very good question anyway. Yeah. Yes.
So we are living in crisis and we are promoting the tourism.
Yes.
Will it affect this migratory birds, and is there a negative or positive impact?
Well, it has both negative and positive things, but then we are also trying to promote ecotourism in that area. Ecotourism is actually responsible travel to these natural areas where you use minimal resources, and then you study the whatever is there and then come back without doing harm to the natural environment. But mass tourism is kind of harmful. So what we should promote is actually ecotourism. We should promote ecological tourism. That is what we are actually trying to promote in those areas as well. Now, my student Rajkumar is now actually he's working for the Jaffna local government now. He's a graduate from Jaffna University, but he has a master's degree from here, right? So he's now trying to promote this ecotourism in that area. He's still working. Just before this talk also, he called me, right? So he's trying to promote ecotourism in all these areas in Jaffna. As a result, sometimes he's also in trouble with the ministers and everything, but then he's trying hard to do that. Right? Ecotourism is probably the only option, not the mass tourism.
So to thank Dr. Chandra Vijay, we have some more token of appreciation. I invite Deputy Director and Consultancy and Center for Environment and Sustainability to hand over. Thank you very much for participating today, and we expect you to be with us during this talk series as well as all the activities we are organizing in the future, because we need your help to make a difference